I'm going to quickly introduce myself. I want to get right into it. I really want to leave as much time as I can for you guys to share today. I'm the Manager of Trust and Security Governance at Rapid7. Here are some of the things my team works on in order of coolness. Security audits, just down in the bottom corner, hanging on by a thread. So who actually, can you guys hear me okay? Okay, great. Who actually took the time to read this right on the front of the BSides website? Okay, well, that's pretty good. I am in governance. I am very detail-oriented, and I follow instructions. So a conversation is exactly what you're going to get today. And I just want to mentally prepare you so that when I do ask you to share, you're feeling ready. Hopefully, it goes without saying that ambassadors are a really powerful tool when we are trying to get things done. I personally rely on ambassadors when I'm trying to roll out a new cross-functional process, when I'm trying to change user behavior, and especially when I am trying to get money for a project. Given the track that we're on today, some of you need ambassadors who can help you convince giant Fortune 100 companies to refrain from putting out products that could put our privacy and safety at risk. So those are pretty big stakes. And, oh, do I have a mouse? I do. And the more InfoSec ambassadors we can get on our side in that endeavor, the more successful we're going to be. So we're going to have a conversation about these 4 strategies for building ambassadors. I'll share some examples I've seen of them in action, and I will ask you to share some of your own examples as well. We'll move through as many of these as we can. I really want to prioritize a conversation over hitting every single one of these points. So if we go down a rabbit hole, that is totally fine. Let's get started with this idea of increasing visibility. That animation is different than I thought it would be. It's going to happen 4 times. The first step to getting others to be representatives or promoters on our behalf is to give them visibility into the work that we're doing. They can't be an ambassador for us if they don't even know who we are or what we're doing. So I'll start with the most obvious way to build visibility for yourself, your team, your work, and that is building interpersonal relationships. I know that sounds painfully obvious, but I really don't think we can overstate the importance of building these personal relationships when we need to get things done. It would be wonderful if everyone just inherently understood why what we are working on is important and matters, but unfortunately, the world rarely works that way. So let's dive into our first case study. Colin Morgan, who some of you probably know, is the Director of Research and Development and Product Security at Johnson & Johnson. Security went from being Colin's side project to his full-time job at Johnson & Johnson in 2016. And just a few short weeks after he made that transition, Jay Radcliffe, who was a researcher at Rapid7 at the time, disclosed a vuln in the one-touch ping insulin pump system after he discovered that an attacker could potentially trigger unauthorized insulin injections. Again, Colin's program was totally brand new, and there really weren't a lot of people outside of Colin and his immediate team who understood this concept of vuln disclosure. And a lot of people initially saw Jay as an adversary. They didn't understand why he was doing this. They felt like he was working against them and not with them. So very sensitive subject situation. There's a lot that could have gone wrong there. So I talked about this experience with both Colin and Jen Ellis, who is the VP of Community and Public Affairs at Rapid7. And something that really stood out to me when I was talking to them was how much they talked about each other. Jen could not say enough about how responsive and effective Colin was throughout the process. And Colin was very appreciative of Jen's input, especially on the right way to disclose. obviously, when people's health is at stake, we want to make sure all of our communications are very thoughtful and strategic. And that is Jen's specialty. So they work together really well as a team. It was really clear that Colin and Jen and Jay all really respected and admired each other, and they were great ambassadors for each other throughout the whole experience. Colin was able to quickly get other leaders from J&J on board with remediation efforts, and he really helped all of them understand that they were all working towards that same goal of patient safety. He really, instead of just making sure, you need to prioritize this, we need to do this, made sure that they really understood where Jay and Jen were coming from, why this was happening, why they really all had the same goals. And when it came to communicating with the public, I was really struck by a section in the Vuln disclosure called Researchers' Note Regarding Mitigations, which I used to help people write Vuln disclosures, and I've never seen a note like this included in one before. It's very, very personal. It really shows how much empathy Jay has for not only the people who rely on this product, but also the people at Johnson & Johnson who are working so hard to make this right. He explains the risks in plain English. He's urging people not to make any rash decisions that could have a negative impact on their health. And he explains why he's doing this research. Again, that's probably obvious to the people in this room, but it's really not obvious to everyone. And it's great that he really took the time to spell it out. I mean, this third line down, if any of my children became diabetic and the medical staff recommended putting them on a pump, I would not hesitate to put them on a one-touch ping. Like, that is it's very authentic, it's very personal, and he really is building a relationship with the readers of the disclosure. Rapid7 does a lot of security research, but I have heard of Johnson & Johnson cited over and over again as the gold standard for Vuln disclosure partners. And I really do feel like this interpersonal love fest had a lot to do with that. Colin was an ambassador for Jay and Jen. He built more security ambassadors at Johnson & Johnson. And then together, they built more ambassadors in the public who understood through this experience their mission of making our increasingly connected world a safer place. At my old job, as I mentioned, I used to help people write Vuln disclosures, and I cannot tell you how many times I would look at their timeline and it would say, well, we DM'd them on Twitter and we called the 1-800 number and no one responded, so we're going to go public. And I hear some sounds of acknowledging that this is not the best move. And I understand being really excited about this Vuln that you just found and you can't wait to share with the world. And also, the assumption that the person on the other end of that communication knows what they're looking at and decided to blow it off. I would suggest that that's probably not what's happening. I would suggest that the people on the other side of that communication probably don't know what they're looking at, and that if we take the time to get a hold of a real person, build a real relationship with them, and try to tackle this problem together, we're going to get much better results like we did in this Johnson & Johnson situation. I will acknowledge that building interpersonal relationships, while important, can be kind of intense, and especially for introverts, it can be exhausting, but there are plenty of other ways to increase visibility. Sometimes we just need to write it down. At Rapid7, the InfoSec team reports into the products organization, which is pretty unique. And in the products org, we have something called Project Central. So when we kick off a new project, we create a page in Project Central, and we have to answer these questions about our project. And this gives us visibility. It gives other people visibility into what we are working on, and it forces us to think through every single one of these questions, which is a very meaningful exercise. some of these you can tell this is geared for a products organization, and not all of them will apply, but some of them definitely do, and some of them are often things that I haven't thought through myself. So once I go through this exercise, I'm always able to articulate what I'm working on and why it's useful immediately at the drop of a hat. And even if you don't have a Project Central to host this type of information, there's tons of other ways you can share it. I'm sure a lot of you are already sharing updates on your work on, in a newsletter, in blogs, on Twitter. And if that feels sort of, icky to you, I know, like, thought leader feels like an icky word to me. If we reframe it and just remember that this isn't so much about tooting our own horns as it can be about getting ambassadors and building visibility into what you're working on and getting more people on board, maybe it will feel a little more natural. At Rapid7, we are an agile company. Most of the engineering teams do bi-weekly demos, so it does make sense for us to give people visibility into what we're working on with a similar bi-weekly demo. If you don't have that format at your organization, a more informal lunch and learn might accomplish those same goals. And I'm going to stop talking for a little now. I really want to hear from some of you. Who is your ambassador and how did you connect with them? If you're just thinking about, like, who is that person who helps you get things done, whether it's a project that you work on with them, how did they find you? How did you find each other? Does anyone have anything they want to? I can stand. Yeah, classic Nick Davis, breaking the ice. Yes, a mic for Nick Davis.
Hi, Internet people. Hi, I'm Nick. I also work at Rapid7. I promise I'm not a plant.
That's true. I did not prep him for this.
Yeah, so I work in product management for our SIM solution inside ER. And what was really challenging for me in my day-to-day job was making sure that we were evangelizing exactly what that product does and why it's useful to you guys, security operations teams, etc., to people who don't get that. And I don't want to burn anybody, but it's sales. And
this is a safe space to drag sales.
right. No, we don't like sales. No one anyways. So for what I ended up finding was I found this guy who's a sales engineer, so more technical, who actually really enjoyed security, and we just got him using the tool. We got him access to whatever he wanted to do, whenever he wanted to do it. Got him talking to penetration testers, security researchers, just learn as much as he wanted, and he really developed very quickly. And what was great about that was that passion and knowledge spread to the rest of his team way quicker than if I tried to force it down their throats myself.
How did you? Was this someone who you knew through work, who you had a friendship with, and then how did you identify this is going to be the person?
Literally met him at a bar.
Yeah, interpersonal relationships.
We had a beer, and I realized that he really loved security. And the next day, I woke up and I waddled to the office and I sent him a message on Slack. I was like, "Hey man, you still want access to our testing environment? Because you can have it." And we started working together, and now he's our senior specialist for sales engineering for Inside ER. So it's pretty cool.
Interpersonal relationships are lit. There's another hand. A non-Rapid7 person.
Yes, but I'm actually the ambassador. I used to be the community manager for a major security vendor who I will not name at the moment because I don't work for them anymore. But I actually accidentally took over the community. I was actually the platform manager and accidentally answered a Unix question in the community, right? And what I found, going back to the bar issue, as much as a lot of people say we really don't want tech and alcohol related, I had a weekly whiskey meet, and it had 3 really simple rules. And it's show up, even if it's for 5 minutes. You don't have to drink. Bring the legal vice of your choice, and be responsible. Those were the 3 rules. And we got all kinds of people from across all different kinds of organizations in the company to come and just, if nothing else, introduce themselves and say hi. So that was the number one thing, is in going to those, building those interpersonal relationships. If you are the ambassador, there's some really simple things that you can do for that. And then the second thing is on the documentation and PR yourself, for community managers or anyone in marketing who's writing these blogs, who's writing this stuff, say thank you. Like, a lot of these guys or girls who are doing the tech and are helping you write this material, they don't know how to promote themselves, and it isn't native to them. So call them out on Twitter, call them out in your blog, call them out if they want you to, and say, hey, thanks to X, Y, and Z for helping me put this together. And that became really powerful.
I love that. I also think you should thank the people in marketing who are helping you articulate your thoughts. It is really wild to me, everywhere I've worked, this resource of marketing, we think of them as just like, putting up the ads in Vegas that we're walking past, but they really can help you articulate a project that you're working on, even communication throughout the organization. They can be a really useful resource. But definitely, buy them whiskey after they help you with that. Those were really great examples. Does anyone else want to share one? We have more. Oh, yeah. This is so great. I thought no one would talk today.
Maybe my story's a little different, but it started when I saw this bumper sticker that said, no one's completely useless. They can always serve as a bad example. And the issue I was having was we would do phishing campaigns in our organization, and I started noticing a trend that the same small few were the ones that were always clicking the bait. And instead of just sending them to training and chastising them, I thought maybe just a lighthearted, fun approach to put up my own version of a wall of sheep, but have them teach training, phishing awareness training to other people, and started using them as small unit trainers for their own division. And it not only did it change their minds, using those trainers as little ambassadors for my program started to help. So, similar story.
I love that idea of, I feel like we always think of ambassadors as the people who naturally are inclined. When I think of security ambassadors, I think of that engineer who's always asking security questions and always speaking up when they see something fishy. But actually leveraging people who are struggling with security to be your ambassadors accomplishes that goal of having ambassadors. And we all know that you learn more when you teach. It's the best way to learn something new. So, yeah.
Thanks very much for sharing your thoughts. I was at an event yesterday, and I was sharing some information about how individuals can protect themselves against ransomware. And there's a person in the audience who told their own story about how they themselves were affected by ransomware. And so to me, what the opportunity is as we speak and engage with various communities and folks in our lives, for people to feel that they can share even a bad event without being shamed. Because who wants to be shamed? Not me.
Are you a plant? That is literally my next topic.
Oh. No, I'm not a plant, but I'm telling you that for $100 you can buy a 4 terabyte removable drive at your shop of choice so that you don't have to be a victim. And so that was the pro tip. It's not like super hard. And this guy in the audience, he's like, yep, that happened to me.
Nothing turns you into an ambassador like, well, I had this experience and I do not want it for you.
Yep. So thanks.
That's brilliant. Okay, I'm going to move on because that was iconic. Wow. Really killing it this morning. The next topic I wanted to address was creating positive experiences for people as a way to, retain them as ambassadors. And a couple ways that we can do this. One way is to eliminate blame language from our vocabulary. This honestly gets right on what you were just talking about. I first came across this topic in a blog post by Jacob Kaplan-Moss, in which he explored the blameful culture of InfoSec that focuses on individual failures instead of systemic ones. So if we look at a specific incident, let's say a user, clicks a phishing link, for example, that they're not supposed to. A bad apple, or I'm sorry, a blame-focused security team would call that a bad apple. Like, they just aren't doing a good job. It's something about them that is causing the issue. And maybe you even, get sassy with the user and you're like, you need to, it's your problem. You need to fix it yourself. That creates two issues. One, our engagement with that user can leave them feeling crappy, and then they are less likely to reach out to us again if they have an issue. That is very much the opposite of an ambassador, if they start avoiding us and avoiding anything that has to do with us. And two, we didn't force ourselves to explore why this actually happened. We may have missed a systemic problem. A less blame-focused InfoSec team will team up with the user and zoom out and consider, all right, how did this slip through the cracks? In this case of the phishing link, maybe we need to change our spam filters. Maybe there's more user awareness training we can do. Maybe we can have those who are clicking the link teach the user awareness training. There's all sorts of systemic changes that we could put in place instead of just, investigating the incident, closing it out, and being like, well, it's that person's fault. We don't want to create opposing sides. We want to have this mindset that something bad happened to us, so what are we together going to do to fix that? It helps us build ambassadors, and it's just a more effective approach. Claire Tills, who I think is here, iconic. I've quoted her in literally every talk I've ever given. I'll give you a minute to follow her on Twitter. Take your time. Has my favorite blog on the internet. She has a background in crisis communications in PR, and she looks at InfoSec through a social sciences lens, and I have learned so much from it. I have especially appreciated her ability to use research to demonstrate why InfoSec communication needs to move into a more positive and proactive place. Did you follow her? Yeah. Excellent. You can always find her at the end if you haven't yet. So on her blog, she noted that, and I love this study because it's one thing to just say, oh, you need to be more positive. It's another thing to have research that backs that up. In a 1999 study, beachgoers were presented with informational pamphlets, and then they were given a coupon for free sunscreen. People who got pamphlets that focused on the benefits of wearing sunscreen were more likely to use the coupon and go buy sunscreen than people who were given pamphlets about the negative outcomes of not wearing sunscreen. There is a lot we can learn from that. My takeaway is, everyone in this room knows that the consequences of ignoring security hygiene can be really devastating. But when we have the opportunity to do so, let's focus on the positives and make people feel good about engaging with us and engaging with our work and engaging with these complicated issues. This year at Rapid7, we built a security awareness training module for employees. And it was, we were writing it from scratch, and it was so tempting. We had to keep going back and revising because it's so easy to default on these scare tactics of here's what can happen when you're not diligent. But there really is a lot to gain by following security best practices. Here are some of the ones that Claire listed on her blog, but I'm sure that you can think of a lot more, and we definitely included a lot more in our awareness training. Okay, so we already got started on this subject of, using positive language, being inclusive. Actually, both of you hit on great ways to include people who might be struggling with security issues and turn them into ambassadors. I am interested to see if anyone has stories of when they've used this positive communication effectively, or times that you haven't used it effectively and what happened.
Well, first of all, great message. I think it's very useful to do. I think it's very hard to do, and I think our industry is growing very rapidly because of the use of fear, and so therefore it is very hard for vendors to back off from the scare them into using it versus encourage them to use it. But it's a very hard to read book, but got some great concepts in it by Searson and Hubbard on how to do it all in terms of economics instead of fear, and that we really should be making economic risk decisions as opposed to do this or you're going to get fired or whatever. So
Ooh, I like that.
I at least found that useful in trying to convince vendors to stop using fear in their selling and try and convince users. I used to be AT&T's chief architect, so I would hit by a lot of vendors on buying stuff, and they should be showing me the economic benefits instead of trying to scare me into buying it.
Yeah, it's wild how that is. I honestly hadn't even thought about, which is insane, being in Vegas this week. You would think that would be the first thing that would come to mind, as I am literally surrounded by security vendor advertising using fear tactics. But I hadn't even thought about that in the advertising perspective, and that is really interesting. Yeah, sure.
Hi, so this one's a little bit of a fail, but I'm trying to bring secure software development concepts at my work, and I sit right outside the conference room where the developers have their daily scrums. So I hung one of the SANS posters on the secure software development lifecycle right outside. They can't miss it. Never one comment, one question on it. I changed it and put up some Firefly swag that a student gave me, and immediately started getting comments. So they saw it, they just didn't care. But like I said, it ended with a fail, but I did try.
Was that, was it what was the message there? Just simple instructions, or?
I didn't expect them to stand there and read through it. I was hoping to at least get a question that I could start the inroad, because I have several different documents I could point them to that says you're supposed to be doing it, so it's not the one cybersecurity person trying to justify their job. But I was just trying to introduce the topic.
Yeah, okay, so this is wild how this keeps happening, but I actually feel like that segues really well into this next concept. That animation is not working for me. I should have done a run through. This topic of how we get feedback in aligned incentives. And I actually think that, implementing an SDLC process is kind of a perfect case study to dive into there. And there's a lot of, I'm going to write that one down because I wanted to write down people's ideas anyway. But we always say we don't want to be the team of no, and we want to enable people. But we ask people to do things that make their jobs harder, that we ask them to take an extra step. I, too, have had issues with the SDLC process. And, we have conflicting objectives. I want to make sure that it's going through every review it needs to go to, and they want things done really quickly. So, I want to get back to that one. Let's actually think of some other, I'm going to write these down, but what are other things that we as security people are doing that, make people's jobs harder and create an extra step for them and take extra time? I feel like you can just shout these out and I'll repeat them. Vuln scanning. Yes, that definitely takes time. Patching the things that we find takes time. What else? Oh, compliance, my fave. What was the first word you said? Oh, hardening. Yes, yeah, right. A lot of compliance frameworks require additional steps that maybe if we were just looking at things from a risk perspective, we might not necessarily take that step, but as soon as auditors and customers have visibility into whether or not we're following that process, we better be following that process. Password expirations, yes. That is a hot topic at Rapid7 right now. New NIST guidance says we maybe don't have to. Our customers say, no, keep doing it. So, yeah, that's a great one. Password, and for passwords, I mean, even just thinking about conversations you've probably had with family and friends about not reusing the same password everywhere and setting up a password manager. These are asking people to take extra steps in their lives. You know, every time they log into something, they have to go to their password manager first. Like, I think of my password manager as something that enables me, but for people whose the alternative is using the same password everywhere, that's an extra step for them in their day. I will repeat that one. Password managers all can be hacked. It's a really bad idea. I am ride or die team password manager. Encryption and Notepad is a thing as well. That's the password manager. That's valid. What? Yes. What if you have two-factor authentication on your password manager? I do. Exactly. This is all, their password managers are not real rabbit hole stitch here. I don't think that they are a foolproof option, but when my alternative is my users, if I give them Notepad and encryption, I am still worried that it's not user friendly enough for them, that they will still take risks and keep using the same password everywhere for my personal use case. But no, I agree that what you have built is its own, maybe more hardened password manager. So what's happening? What year is it? Okay. So how am I doing for time? Oh, okay. Well, because you guys are telling so many stories. This is great. Okay. Very quick story about a challenging cross-functional project that required a lot of buy-in. We needed to formalize the process around inbound security disclosures at Rapid7. So how we handled it when we were notified about a vuln that impacted either one of our products or some other system that we rely on. And our team needed a lot of ambassadors to get this done. For the sake of time, I did build in more content in case no one talked, but I'm pleased that that's not the situation. I will just focus on one group of ambassadors, and that is the remediation team. So these are often engineering teams whose bonuses depend on their ability to get features out on schedule, and we are throwing unplanned work at them. So but we can't do remediation without their help. We really need them on our side, and we need them to be part of this process. We're competing with other priorities. We need to look for opportunities to get feedback from these people who we need on our team and hopefully align incentives wherever we can. So we decided on the security team that remediation SLAs were going to be based on CVSS scores. Does that make sense? Basically? Can you think of any reason why this wouldn't work? Yes. The importance of the asset may be different. So I'm fairly sure that gets calculated in as part of the CVSS scoring calculation. Yeah. That's yeah, well, you may be encouraging the engineers to not find things, but they can't control that external researchers are finding things. Yeah. Oh no, that's not even the plot hole I had thought of. The engineers were very quick to point out a complexity that I had not thought of, and that is that the severity of the vulnerability that has been discovered and reported often doesn't have anything to do with the amount of complexity and work required to fix it. So even if it is, the most severe vulnerability of all time, us coming up with an SLA of 5 minutes doesn't mean that they're going to technically, physically be able to get that work done in that SLA that we have set. I genuinely had not thought about that issue. So, but we heard that feedback, and this is just a little snippet from our larger vuln disclosure standard operating procedure. It's probably not visible at all, but I'll just point to the sections I'm talking about. Essentially, security team is throwing this vuln over to the remediation team. We've calculated the CVSS score, and they have visibility into all of those inputs. So if they have a disagreement about the CVSS score, they can argue with us in the calculator. And then they just need to acknowledge that they've received it. They basically agree with our CVSS score calculation and our SLA. And if they don't, there is a process for them to say, hey, this SLA is not something, and in our macros that we use to communicate to make sure our communication is consistent, we reiterate right in the ticket, if you need an exception, if it's not going to be feasible for you to remediate this within the SLA, you can write in the ticket, just explain why, and that'll go to the head of InfoSec, who 99% of the time will look at that and say, yeah, no, that makes sense. Technically, it would be extremely difficult or impossible for them to remediate it within this SLA. We can take on, that's an acceptable level of risk for us to let that work go on another 5 days and give them the time they need to fix it. If there is a situation, which we genuinely have not had yet, where the head of InfoSec just says, you know what, you just have to do it. You have to prioritize this. You should be able to get it done. We talked to the leadership of the engineering organization, and they said, yeah, at that point, we would want to, again, we report into product, so it's actually the CISO's boss who would be able to make that final decision. He's representing the engineering perspective and the security perspective, and he would be able to make that final decision about the timeline that this work needs to get done in. The metric that we're interested in at the end of each quarter is, was each product remediation team able to meet their SLAs? So now what we've built is a process to extend that SLA when the complexity makes remediation in that timeline unrealistic. And these remediation teams can rest assured that they're not going to get screwed over by this complexity not equating to severity issue. The only way they're going to miss that SLA and look bad in that quarterly business review is if they just ignore it and they don't respond and they don't ask for an extension. So it's been really successful. Our remediation teams were very appreciative that we took their feedback into consideration when we showed them what we'd come up with to address the process or the issue. They were pleased. And hopefully they feel an increased sense of ownership and investment in this process that they really actively worked to shape with us. And this metric that we're reporting on helps us solve this issue of misaligned incentives. This is no longer an issue that's distracting them from the work that they actually get credit for, that their bosses have visibility into. And instead, it's now a part of their job that leadership sees this metric at the end of each quarter, and if they do a great job, they get positive feedback for that. So it was a crafty way to align those incentives. So we talked before about a few things that we do that make people's jobs harder, and I'm wondering if you guys have any ideas about how we could get feedback from other stakeholder groups that are involved and maybe realign incentives so that they are incentivized to follow the process that we think is right. I would love to start with that SDLC example because I think it's very complicated. We are asking engineering groups to take extra steps and spend extra time. So does anyone have any ideas of how that's worked successfully or not successfully? Sure.
First introducing static, this is a number of years ago, first introducing static code scanning, and there was a lot of resistance from the developer community because all of a sudden done, A, it was extra work, and B, it was noisy because this was a number of years, it's not that great now, but it was even worse back then. But the reality is when you get right down to it, what it was doing was finding bugs. So we learned over time to introduce it as helping them do their job better and finding the bugs that in the long run is better for them to find them. not it's security making you run this tool. So that was
Right.
something we
And
found
did you
useful.
get positive feedback from that?
Yes, it
They were
was. In general, software developers want to find bugs.
Right.
They generally want to do that. They generally don't want to get told to do things. So it's more a matter of helping them do what they want to do and presenting it that way.
I love that. Very crafty. And anything else we talked about too, whether it's vuln scanning and patching, how we align incentives, and we definitely have a lot of dashboards that people, the amount of leadership eyes we have on those dashboards often makes a big difference into the amount of patching that's actually getting done. And even, whether it's password expiration or password managers, even if it's conversations with like your friends and family, how have you aligned those incentives or got feedback? Oh no. Wow. Okay, so keep thinking. I'll be right back. Yes.
Okay, so I'm sorry that none of my stories have happy endings, but so another approach I took at a different organization was I provided all the developers with a link to SANS had a self-test on what is your secure development knowledge, and most, if not all, of the developers went and followed the link and they took the test, and I got a lot of feedback. They thought it was really interesting, and I basically did a survey. How interested are you in additional training on this? Great response from them. I think it goes to what the person said, that vulnerabilities are just another bug, another form of quality, and so they were interested in doing that. And then when I
But
presented
where's the
that,
bad ending?
I'm sorry?
It sounds so hopeful.
Yeah, it sounds hopeful. Yes,
Where does
but
it take a
like I
turn?
said, I'm Eeyore over here. It's gonna rain today. So I presented this to the manager, and I swear I'm gonna have a poster made of this quote, because he said, "I have software to deliver. I will worry about security later."
Let's
And
get that on a T-shirt.
That is a verbatim. That is emblazoned on my head. And I could have, when the software wasn't accepted by the customer later because it wasn't meeting all the compliance scans, and
Iconic,
they added the
yes.
time, it probably all worked out. But I think it's the developers are usually on board. It's the schedule and the other resource problems that they have that, and I'll point to management saying, you're putting something, we're saying we're making the job harder. We're also saying it's going to take longer for you to do something potentially.
Right.
So if I come up with a happy story, I promise I will raise my hand.
Well, that's our next EFF fundraiser. It's going to be selling shirts with that written on it. So that's our happy ending. We're going to raise tons of money. It'll be great.
Well, I guess I'm going to be the troublemaker. So what do you do when you find a problem and you contact the company and nobody will talk to you at all and nobody cares? I do this all the time. 95% of the time, this is what happens. Then I go full disclosure.
Right.
What else can I do? Nobody cares.
So, I don't disagree with that approach. And there were plenty of people that I worked with who were disclosing vulnerabilities who did that. They very, very actively tried to hunt people down. LinkedIn, Twitter, phone calls, emails, explaining, I'm looking at their communications. They are writing out, I think you should give him back the mic.
I just want to say, after practice, I completely abandoned all serious hope to reach people, and my point is just a matter of compliance. I want a paper trail that I did make a pro
Right.
forma attempt to reach
Wow.
them, and then I dump it publicly because I know nobody cares.
That is wild that when you're doing that outreach, you're thinking, well, I need a paper trail that shows I tried
That's
to
all I'm going to
contact
get.
you. I mean, I obviously am spoiled working at a security company. Like, that sounds so
If I
foreign
were
to me.
Rapid7, they would answer my emails.
Right, yeah. Yeah. Right. But and I think that's also different than these examples of when I'm looking at their paper trail, I'm seeing a very half-baked message that to me doesn't clearly articulate to someone who's on the other end of an info@ email what they're looking at here and the action that they're asking them to take. And they, maybe sent it to info@ or maybe sent it, call the 1-800 number. Totally different than I clearly can show you, look at how I've tried to reach out to you. And at that point, I mean, that's why public disclosure exists, and then they're going to care about it a bunch, probably. So yeah, no, we are totally on the same page. You are not a troublemaker.
Well, I wouldn't say that.
Yeah, okay, that's a different issue.
What do you do when you have companies that have vulnerabilities? I'll disclose something. Right now, I've been following the information that's available for all of us for sale, meaning the marketing lists. American Express removed almost all of their cardholders from open sale. ESET is currently, the antivirus company, currently has their entire user base for sale by marketing companies. Symantec removed theirs. McAfee's was up for 3 days and now it's gone. Bank of America cardholder list comes and goes from various companies. How do you keep these things away?
I don't think I have a good answer to that. Maybe someone else will, but I don't know. I mean, I guess that's kind of could be a bit of an alignment, an incentive misalignment where they have to invest in removing that data and it takes work and maybe the reward isn't. I'm just trying to bring it home, you know. I don't have a good answer to that. I think how are we doing for time? We've got like 2 minutes. Let's kill it. All right. This one is maybe controversial, maybe not. So think about the best ambassador builder you know. If we're thinking about these areas that we've been talking about, communication, interpersonal relationship building, cross-functional project management, just think about who that is. There's no like right answer. It's obviously going to be different for all of us. And now let's talk about ye old skills gap, because that is such a hot topic for thought leaders right now. My hot take on the skills gap is that we have one in part because we have a narrow understanding of what an information security professional is. My personal experience is that we don't all need to be clones of Mr. Robot to be successful InfoSec professionals. And I have some stats to back me up on that too. This chart shows the disconnect between what members of the workforce think will make them successful and marketable in the InfoSec industry versus what hiring managers are actually looking for. And the very top skill that's being prioritized by hiring managers is actually communication, followed closely by analytical skills. Meanwhile, the workforce is prioritizing a slew of technical skills above those communication and analytical skills. And yet, we as an industry are very quick to devalue anything that isn't a STEM degree. I am definitely not advocating that you build your security team of exclusively recent grads with sociology degrees. But I do think that we should remind ourselves when we're talking about the importance of building ambassadors, especially, that diverse teams are great teams. And if we can put people, there's just so much work to do. I am so tired. Like, there's no shortage of work to do at InfoSec. And if we can put people who have those ambassador building skills in roles where they're going to get to use them, they're going to be getting cross-functional projects done, and you know, building ambassadors inside the organization and outside the organization. It is a skill set that we should take as seriously. That's not to devalue technical skills. We need technical skills in security, obviously. But I do think that we tend to not value these as highly as we could or should. Ooh, it's time. When we think about how important it is in getting work done. This is that English major helping us close the skills gap. Look, he's killing it. Does anyone just want to share like a quick story about someone who has your person you work with who's great at building ambassadors, who like drums up, sure, the ambassadorship on your team?
So on our team, we recently brought in a technical writer that also helps with all the marketing and the communications for reaching out to the company and everything else. And since they come on board, the level of communication has gone up. We've gotten a lot more buy-in. It's been really helpful.
That is, yeah. I mean, I rely. We talked before about how heavily our internal security team, relies on marketing to help us articulate. We're updating our trust page right now so people can have visibility into our internal security controls because they want to know we know what we're doing before they give us their data. And we could not begin to do that without marketing. Anyone else? I feel like guys, thank you so much for talking in the morning when you're hungover. I appreciate it so much. This was really great. Thank you.